You're listening to the Small Business Tech Podcast, brought to you by Frontpoint-IT, Utah's premier managed services provider. Visit us online at www.frontpoint-it.com.
I'm Dan Stanford.
And my name is Jeremy Wright.
And I thought we should start off our podcast today by talking a little bit about what's been going on in the tech world, a little bit of tech news. It's my understanding that Google released a new phone in the last couple of days.
Correct.
You know anything about that?
Well, they released the new line of their Nexus phones, and the Nexus phones are Google's vanilla phones, I guess, as it were. So typically with Android phones, when you buy one from, say, Verizon or AT&T or Samsung, whatever, they add all their little software and all their widgets to the phone to skin it to basically be like a walking advertisement for that company. However, Google has its Nexus line, which is its own phones that they make with contracts through manufacturers, and they have the vanilla experience of Google, so it's the base applications that you would get with it.
Cool. Okay. And then if I recall, there's a certain manufacturer, a certain company in this world, I think they're kind of big, if I remember, they're called Apple, that released some new products in the last week or two.
September 25th.
September 25th, yeah. They, I happen to have one of them right here, the 6S, and then, of course, you got the
6S Plus.
6S Plus. What are your thoughts on it? How do you like the 6S versus the 6, Jeremy?
It's faster and I've never been one to say that my phone was ever slow. I've pretty much had the new iPhone all the time. And I've never once have said like, oh, this phone is slow, I need the new one. But now this one's like too fast almost. Like
it's crazy fast. Yeah. It's for example, when you do the fingerprint reader, if you just come up and nudge it using your finger to just look at the screen and see what that alert was, oh no, it goes right in.
Yeah, it's really thrown me off.
Yeah, you could just barely touch it and off it goes. And the processing, of course, on other things is just through the roof. The vibrate alert on it is very different.
It's much more solid.
Yeah, it's kind of like someone poked you, just walked up to you and just like jabbed you when it goes off, say, in your pocket or something. Very different mechanism. And then, of course, kind of one of the biggest things is the Force Touch.
3D Touch.
Oh, is that what they call it? Oh, okay.
On Apple Watch and
right.
On Macs, it is the Force Touch.
Oh.
But on the cell phones, it is 3D Touch.
Oh, okay. I've used the 3D Touch to an extent. It's a little strange. It's almost like magic that it knows, because the screen itself doesn't bend. It doesn't change shapes at all. You don't feel it. It doesn't give you feedback that you're pressing harder, other than, of course, your own thumb telling you that you're pressing harder. So it's not like a click. It's not like the main button on the phone or anything. But I'll be darned, the thing knows exactly how hard you're pressing on it. Yeah,
it's quite impressive. It's called 3D Touch because prior to this, you have two axes of interaction with the iPad or iPhone or any other touchscreen. You have left to right, and then the pushing on, up and down type thing. Those are your interaction. But now you have that third one of the pressure sensitivity of that device. As a side effect of the devices having new screens, basically, because they've implemented 90 different sensors that sense the microscopic bends between the glass. The phones are now thicker and heavier than they were prior. So it's enough that I notice it and I feel it, and it feels like a different phone to me, but it's still the same phone.
If no one had told me that it was heavier or thicker, I wouldn't have known. It is so subtle. It's such a small thing. But you do have the Plus, so it is intrinsically, if it's a 2% heavier the phones are, yours would naturally be, it would have greater weight added onto it than, say, mine would, which is the normal one.
And one thing I did notice that I don't think I've heard anybody talk about is the clearance from the glass to the phone. The change there is much smaller. So, Dan, you're clean shaven pretty much all the time. I am never clean shaven, ever. And if I have my phone up to my face, it actually catches my beard hairs and my other scruff in between it, enough that it pulls on it and it hurts. Not like extremely painful, but slightly annoying. Granted, I never really talk on my phone as an actual cell phone. This one does not do it. That is one thing that I noticed. Yeah, they've changed the clearance between the glass and the metal device now.
No, they're contrary to belief, I can grow 2 or 3 whiskers, just barely. And I remember that with the 6. Yeah, it was quite annoying. It would catch, you'd catch the hair on your face and it'd tug on it. I did not know that had been fixed.
Nobody mentioned it, but I definitely noticed it. Because you take my 6 Plus, my old one, and you can feel the difference.
Yeah, you can feel
but
a
this
little
one,
slight ridge.
you cannot.
Well, I've just been running with a case, and the case took care of that issue. But you're still running with yours naked at the moment. So
They also are slightly waterproof.
yeah, some
Kind
dude
of.
like put his phone in a jar of
Bunch
water or something.
people on YouTube have put so the standard MO is that you put the timer on the stopwatch, and then you put it into a bucket of water or whatever for until it stops working. Well, after 45 minutes, they were still working. And iFixit has done teardowns of the new phones, as they always do almost immediately. And what it is, there's actually a gasket now on the internal parts that goes around it. Probably not intended for the purposes of waterproofing. Probably more for vibration, things like that, keeping things tighter and cleaner and
I would say
more secure.
incidental water too. I mean, that's inevitable when you carry a phone around with you all the time.
But they actually machined the inside differently now so that gasket can fit. It's very, very minute, and if you didn't have anything to tell, you would never know, but they noticed that the gasket is there, and they're attributing that to its waterproofedness. And yeah, they also use the 7000 series aluminum as opposed to the 6000 series aluminum in these new phones. So the previous year had 6000 series, and there was a whole deal about bending with the larger one, which the new aluminum specs is supposed to stop. I never had a problem with it, don't know, but supposedly that's the reason for that.
I'm not interested in figuring out if my phone really is waterproof nor if it will bend.
Yeah, but it's good to know that if you dropped it, there's a good chance. If you dropped it in some water, there's a good chance that it will come out unscathed.
So what else did Apple release? It was more than the phone. There's a couple other things.
Well, they also did the Apple TV. They're going to release the new Apple TV later this year. End of October is the release date, and I will be picking one up. I believe they were $135 and $170.
Yeah,
or
for
somewhere
the amount
in
of
that
storage
range.
on them, which still blows my mind. I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, because these ones you can actually download applications and games onto. So if you're a big mobile gamer, you'll be able to get the games from the App Store, presumably on the television, all the same ones. So you'll want to fill it up with space or fill it up with those applications. That's my guess. I can't think of any other reason other than storing movies and things.
But they're all streamed.
Exactly.
I'd be very surprised if you could actually dump a movie onto it and have it play off the device itself from storage. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I suspect Apple did not do it on accident, where some engineer sat back, scratched his head, and said, "Oh, wait a minute, why did we put all this storage in here?" I bet you I'm sure there's a plan. I bet you.
One of the things that bugs me about that, though, is the price differences. So, for instance, if you have a 16 gig phone and you want to go up to the 64, they charge you like $100.
Yeah.
And then if you go further, it's another 100. Those chips are like $10 difference at their cost. Seems like a racket to me.
Definitely, but we will pay it.
I guess. I'm just saying. It seems really just annoying. One of the things, at least with Google phones, you can add an SD card usually to some of them, not all of them anymore. But you can add an SD card with more storage to increase it, so you can have a base model. There are external devices for Apple products that you can attach via the Lightning connector. The difference is that the iPhone can't use it as like native storage that you can on a Google device. You could have SD cards with different applications loaded onto them. So you could have one that was for, like, if you're going to go do photo shoots, you have specific applications for taking photos, and then one for gaming, that kind of a thing, different SD cards for that, and it'll run them natively just like it was in the internal storage. The iPhone will not. You could use it for photos, but you can't put applications onto it.
Now, Apple, I believe, released the iPad Pro.
Correct.
If I recall what they're calling it. It's basically an oversized iPad, 12 inches across.
12.9.
12.9 across. I missed out on the live demo, the live announcement of it, but you caught it, Jeremy. So other than being bigger, what's the scoop?
I can't figure out who it's for. It's bigger, and it is more powerful than the majority of laptops out there, quite honestly. They showed the performance of it, and you can edit 3 4K video streams simultaneously on it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very, very powerful.
Wow.
It's a whole new class of object. I just can't figure out who it's for. That's what I can't quite get. I don't know.
I know Adobe released some software specifically for it, so I guess
it's also coming with the Apple Pencil.
Okay.
Which is a super fancy stylus. And most styluses, for the record, typically are capacitive, as in they act the same way as your finger, where if you touch something, it's acting just like a finger. This one actually connects to the iPad and then has multiple sensors that tell like the angle, pressure, and all of those kind of things to be able to change the shape of your line when you're drawing on it. So definitely a huge thing for graphic artists or people who produce content on devices. However, if you're a regular person, probably not going to make any difference to you. I mean, just use your fingers. It's more intuitive and easier.
And the pencil, of course, was not free. Did not come with it.
It's like $100 or $120 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's quite the piece of engineering, though, if you look at it. There's so many different sensors and stuff, and it's fantastic.
I'm sure.
And then Apple is also releasing their own keyboard as well. It goes with the iPad Pro, only the iPad Pro. It has a new connector. It's can't remember what they called it, but it's a 3-pronged magnetic connector that produces power or transmits power and data through both.
Is it a cover, kind of like the Microsoft Surface?
Yes, almost identical.
Okay.
It's really cool, though.
Well.
So the iPad Pro is very fast. It's for multitasking. It's for doing video editing. It's for doing Word document editing. It's supposed to be like a large tablet that is almost a laptop.
But its price point, if you throw in that keyboard and you throw in the pen,
it's $899 to start, I think.
To start, so I'm guessing you're going to nudge up against $1,500 pretty dang quick if you got one that was kind of, beefed out.
Yeah.
Which, if I recall, is rate smack where you can get a really good laptop for.
Depends. If you're buying Apple laptops, not really.
Sure, but a Microsoft Windows laptop. I mean, you can get a great one for $1,500.
This does have better performance than most notebooks, though. So we'd have to see some Geekbench numbers on its benchmarks to see where it's at, really.
Well, again, I think you're right. Who is that? Who is it for? Because with the laptop, you know what you can run, basically anything. With the iPad, you're reduced to the iPad apps. I mean, it is not Macintosh. You cannot install Macintosh programs on it. So you have this extremely powerful iPad. Well, in today's terms, watch 2 years from now, the small iPads will be 3 times as powerful as that, way Apple goes. But, who is it for? What apps can you run on it, that you would want to do on it? Where, I mean, is it, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I can see a lot of people who buy it will do, certain particular tasks on it. And then I can see them taking it, from there back over to their Macs or their PCs and then finishing whatever it is that they wanted to do with it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Apple's got it all figured out and it is a laptop replacement. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't quite figure it out either. I don't think it's supposed to be a laptop replacement because then that really it cannibalizes their market, which they've never really been afraid of it because, the iPhone 6 Plus has always eaten away at their iPad mini market and all that kind of. I don't know. I can't figure out what it's for. I want one because it's cool, but I don't think I'd ever use it. And they even had Microsoft come on stage and debut their Office apps for iOS on it because the Microsoft guy said, like, the best Office experience is going to be on iPad Pro, like that kind of a whole spiel. Because he knows that Microsoft has pretty much given up on the whole we're better than Apple type thing, and they're just like, hey, we get people are using iPads, so let's not alienate them anymore. Let's just draw them into our ecosystem with our stuff and give them whatever we can.
That is such a massive change in Microsoft.
Oh yeah.
I mean, to reiterate that, Microsoft officials were there at the Apple event, came up on stage and presented their software running on an Apple product. I mean, in the Ballmer days, there's not a chance. I mean, I can see Ballmer like doing a naked streak across the stage, yelling something about Windows, or that would be the extent of Microsoft's involvement with a live Apple event, but not with the new dude there.
That also tells you that they've been working on it in development for quite some time, working together cohesively to be able to, Apple showed Microsoft their product before it was ever released to the public or before anybody else knew about it. So that's an interesting side note on their business model and structure, I guess.
So next, I'd like to move on and talk about small business backups. We've, in our experience here working with our clients, we've had some interesting events occur with the backups, even going over the past year, but even a little bit more recently. So just to set the stage on this discussion, we are talking about small business backups. We're not talking about enterprise grade. We're not talking about the big dog stuff. We're talking about the stuff that you, our listeners and viewers, would actually be able to apply to your business. First, let's get the most obvious thing out of the way. Why do you need a small business or a backup for your servers and for your data? There's a number of different reasons for that. I'm going to go over them a little bit. You've got your backups are for accidents, and whether it is an employee who accidentally overwrites a file or accidentally deletes a file, that is why you have a backup. It is for employee destruction. Perhaps an employee accidentally, not accidentally, perhaps an employee maliciously deletes some of your data. You have backups for disaster scenarios, whether your server explodes, starts on fire, and just burns to the ground, if you will. No, I've never seen that, but it's not impossible. Weather situations, whether it is a hurricane or natural disasters, I guess is the better way to put it. Floods, earthquakes, that sort of thing, fire, lightning. I have had a server burned to the ground. The building started on fire, and I've had another client of ours get hit by lightning, and it blew out their server, even though it was on a surge suppressor and it had a UPS, all that sort of stuff. If you get enough juice flowing through those wires, not much is going to stop it. So it still took out their server. Theft. What if someone broke into your company and walked out with your server? Viruses. In the last year or so, we've had people pick up, say, the CryptoLocker virus, which encrypts all of your data, or other viruses that just simply love to delete your data. And then another one that most people may not think of, but us in the IT world are a little more aware of, is just simply malfunction. What if Windows itself, your Windows server, just completely malfunctions? A patch update, improper handling of it, misconfiguration is some manner that breaks, and the only way to resolve it is to go back to your backup. So those are the whys. This is why you need a backup. Now, when you're looking at what I want to really get into is the different types of backups and why one type of backup is better for one situation versus another. A couple of questions you need to ask yourself when you're looking at backups is, how long can your company be offline? You've got to take that real honest answer. Jeremy, what have you seen with some of our clients, their tolerance for offline?
Some of them can't tolerate being offline for more than 30 seconds. And some of them can go 2 weeks without having. When you say offline, do you mean
no access to data, server down?
Okay.
Yeah, they can't get to their files and their programs.
So it really depends on how your company runs and where your data is and what kind of programs you rely on to run your day-to-day business. Now, for us in-house, 50% of our stuff is here, 50% of it is cloud-based of some kind. So we could run half of the business if something were to happen to our stuff, We do have backups though, so we don't have to worry about this. But if there was a problem, we didn't have a backup, we could do some tasks because it's cloud-based, and the other half of it we could not do. One thing that is important to clarify there is the difference between having a backup in your office and one off-site.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So some people can be offline for a long period of time, some cannot. So you need to really think about that if you are offline, how much money is that going to cost you, and how much can you tolerate being offline for? Maybe your client, maybe you do a lot of paperwork and you can be offline for an entire month and, have your data being shipped from somewhere in India slowly and carefully over here, and you're totally okay with that. And that's fine as long as you know the limits of that and you are aware of the consequences of what happens when you lose your data and you're prepared for that.
The knee-jerk reaction oftentimes from companies is, well, we can have no downtime. And that is a valid response. Mm-hmm. However, you need to understand the consequences of what that means of no downtime. That we're going to get into the different types of backups and the downtime and all that sort of stuff. First, one more question that as a business owner or an office manager you need to consider is, what is your tolerance for data loss? Now that one seems strange. Wait a minute, no, I can't lose any data. Well, okay, you may not be able to lose, say, your documents, or perhaps you can't lose your QuickBooks data file. That would be catastrophic. But as far as all the notes and other documents, letters we've sent to clients and stuff like that, could your company survive without that information? Or are you talking, hundreds of hours of your employees putting that stuff back together? The other side of it too is, what about the servers themselves? I mean, it's one thing to back up the data, it's another thing to back up the data and the servers. So if you don't have a backup of your servers, again, this goes to your tolerance for data loss. If you don't have a backup of your servers, those servers will need to be rebuilt from the ground up, and there'll be a lot of labor to put it all back together, get the machines reconnected to the server, reorganize it, rebuild it, from the ground up. That's another thing. For some clients, that's not a big deal. They don't really care. They're like, you know what? Yeah, it'll take our IT guys, a few days to get the servers back together. That's fine. Meanwhile, we've got our data that, it'll take a few days to get here anyway. It's all over the scale. We had a small client of ours get hit by the crypto locker. We had to go to backup to restore their data. And it was a small company, I don't know, about 3 or 4 employees. The time it took to restore the data off of the cloud was about 2 weeks. So they could not access their critical application for 2 weeks. So a critical application for a lot of businesses would be, say, QuickBooks, their ability to invoice clients and pay vendors and keep track of inventory and stuff like that. Every business has a critical app, and it may not necessarily be QuickBooks by any stretch. Maybe it's a customer relationship manager, a CRM, something to that effect. They were fine for 2 weeks without that. It wasn't pleasant, but that's what they did. And now that they've been restored and they're back online, they're using the same backup software still. They're fine with knowing exactly the consequences of doing it. So as far as options go for backups, Jeremy, you mentioned local backups. Mm-hmm. A great example of a local backup would be, say, Backup Exec.
Not a great example, but an example.
Yeah, the Backup Exec program leaves much to be desired.
But it does work.
Sort of.
When it works.
Kind of. It'll work for X amount of time and then just stop working, and then you kick it a couple times and it'll start working again for a few weeks, a few months. I've had them go for a few years, mm-hmm. and then just stop. Yeah. Sometimes it'll only go for a day or two and then blow up again. Anyway, that is an example of a local backup. So that is where you back up your data, your server, the data that's on your servers, to a device, a tape, or a removable hard drive, something that is local to your server. They're both basically, if you will, in the same room. Another option is cloud, and we're getting a lot of that. A lot of people are seeing the wisdom in the cloud backups. Want to talk about what a cloud backup is, Mr. Jeremy?
So a cloud backup would be basically somewhere where the data is not in your building. That way, if there was physical damage to your office, to your building, to your company, you would not have to worry about it because it is not there. There's a lot of ways to do that. Most of our clients, we do a combination of a local and a cloud backup for speed issues like you were talking about. I'm sure you're going to get to that, though.
Yep.
There's many ways to do a cloud backup. You can pay a third party to do it. There's co-location and co-hosting, where you can pay another company to host a server for you that has your backup on it. Or there's companies that's all they do, where you just install a little program onto the server or onto your computer. This also works for desktops, by the way. And you can back up the data across the internet to somebody else's location. And if there's any problem physically in your network or in your building, you can easily retrieve that data from the cloud. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to have your hands physically on that data.
The drawbacks to that is it's heavily dependent on your internet connections, the speed of your internet connection.
Yes.
How long it takes to do the backups themselves, how long it would take to restore that data. So the client I spoke about earlier, the example of the 2 weeks, it was all cloud-based, and it took 2 weeks to download that data on their tiny little internet connection. And just like you mentioned, there are hybrids of that. The way that we the backup solutions that we offer are all hybrids, where it backs up your data to a local device, and then that local device in the background then replicates across the internet to a cloud repository. So your data is always, your backup data is always in two places. You have the advantage of it being right there local to your server, so you can do very quick restores. You can access it, just right there. And then, of course, it's across the internet in a disaster situation. If your building were to, have a problem or something to that effect, you have 2 copies of it.
It also offloads some of the processing power as well.
Oh,
of having to do the actual backup and storage. There's another device that's handling it instead of the main one that you're using doesn't have to deal with it.
Good point. Which allows you to also get into where you can do multiple backups in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, if you're doing a local backup, because it is so intensive on the machine, that needs to run at night once a night. Where when you get into the little bit more fancy situations, the hybrid models, you can do multiple backups throughout the day. Our top-of-the-line system that we offer, it can go down to every 15 minutes. It can do a backup. There are what they call continuous backups. Be slightly wary of those. They can put a decent amount of strain on your server, because it is basically anytime a file is altered, it then makes a copy of it and backs it up. The biggest reason for that is, even if your server is sitting completely idle and not doing anything whatsoever, the server software in the background is always doing something all the time and always modifying files, and that would be a continual change, which would cause real problems with a continuous backup system. Another important thing to consider with a backup is the method that it uses to backup. There's file level and image level. You want to talk about those differences?
Yeah, so when we're talking about file level or image level, an image level backup would be a replica of the server, and that means not just the data contained therein, but also the entire operating system and the state of that server as it was sitting there at the time of the backup. So what that means is, depending on your setup, is you can actually bring that server live virtually. So you could take a physical box that has melted into a pile of goop, and since we have a backup of it, we can turn it into a virtual machine that is exactly the same, implement it onto the network, onto another device, and it would be like that server was never gone. And that's the image level backup, where you're making, it's like taking a picture of the server and, well, it's literally taking a picture of the server and putting it into a single contained location. And then you have to have the software to be able to read that file and do something with it. But of course, if you're backing it up, you have that. The file level backup is more like making photocopies of the files themselves, not so much the actual server. So if your server crashed and completely was obliterated, you'd have all of your data, sure, but you'd be missing the components maybe to read some of that data, some of the software. If you have databases and you don't have the correct configuration, you can lose that kind of stuff. And then it's not the same as having an image level backup. You just have copies of the files themselves, not of the whole server, which can be helpful, but not as good as a full image level.
No, a file level, again, it goes to those original questions. What is your tolerance for downtime and what is your tolerance for data loss? I mean, if you say, you know what, all I need a backup of is my QuickBooks data file. Everything else can burn to the ground and go away. But if I lose that, then my company's out of business, and that's all I want to back up. The advantage to that is it will be very inexpensive to back up just that QuickBooks data file. I mean, that's seriously not a big deal. You're talking, a few dollars, if even $1 a month to do something like that. But the risk is, of course, you would lose your server, you'd lose all that configuration, and that would need to be rebuilt. Where, like you said, with the image level, it is a perfect cloned copy. It is every last minute detail of that server is a complete copy of it, which then gets into being able to restore that data. So even though you have an image level backup, are you able to pick out one file out of that? So if Sally or Joe over there accidentally deletes a file, are you left with the only option of actually restoring the entire server? That isn't entirely practical. Does the software have the ability to reach in, pop out that one little file? Now, some of the small business people out there, you guys may have, say, SQL servers or Exchange servers. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But if you do know what I'm talking about, then you have them in-house. Do you have the ability to reach in and pull out a single email? Do you have the ability to reach in and pull out a single table out of an SQL database? Those things are important to know about and understand. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a position where somebody accidentally deletes, say, a client out of your CRM, and you have to restore the entire database back to last night. That's not really a practical thing to do. So you need to watch out for the granularity of your restores and what you can do with that.
I've had to do that before. We had somebody who deleted a client out of their CRM, and they lost all the transactions and everything. So I had to restore the database to the day before, the night before, and help them rerun the transactions. But it was a very large client of theirs, and if they weren't able to do that, it would have been a catastrophic, huge problem, and the person probably would have been fired for losing all that data.
So you got, it's some of those subtle things that can happen, and I know as I'm talking about this, I'm throwing a great deal of details out there, image level, how much data can you tolerate, hybrid versus, local, all that sort of stuff. And the bottom line is that's why you hire an IT company, is we are here to understand these sort of things. We would then sit down and interview you, talk to you about, the questions that I asked, and say, and then we would come up, and we would say those questions, we would come up with a solution for you and say, you know what, I think this software will give you the best results for, all the parameters that, will work for your business. The other thing to consider too is as your business grows, you can grow outside of those original parameters, and you may need to revisit your backup strategy.
We spend quite a bit time every day dealing with backups. We check every day to make sure every one of our clients is backing up, make sure it's all going well, and if it's not, we have to look into it, figure out what's going on, because that's the last thing that we want is for anybody to not have a backup. Because you can think to your head like, oh, just one day it'll be fine, but that will be the one day that something happens and it becomes a huge problem, because it's a liability for us as well, and so we have to be aware of that.
It is, and we have worked with many, many clients in many situations of data loss and working on their data recovery, anywhere from a absolute trivial matter where they're blown away that we could recover the data in a matter of seconds, to sending their hard drives off to a data recovery and it costing thousands, if not $10,000, to try to recover the data, and just absolute panic on their part that their employees can no longer work. And we have seen, I have seen it all. I had a client a number of years ago that their SQL database blew up and they had no backup of it, and they tried to repair the database. And those poor employees were there overnight for around 3 days straight. They were sleeping on the floor. And what it eventually came down to was the database, they partially recovered it, and then the employees had to start re-inputting data, years worth of data. That company went out of business, by the way. They never did recover from that. A few months later, they went down and they were gone. So pay attention to your backups. Think about the backups strategy that you have. If you're not sure and you don't understand it, then bring it to an IT company and discuss it with them. A couple other pitfalls to think about with your backup strategy, questions to ask yourself. How far back do the backups go? I know, is it 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month? Is it 1 year? What is that number? What happens if an employee deletes some information 2 months ago and doesn't realize it until today? Is it possible to recover that data? Is that important to you to be able to recover data that's that old? Of course, there's costs associated with all this. The more backup sets that you want, the longer back your backup goes. All sorts of data requirements start to boil into this. How often does your backup run? Is it nightly? Is it hourly? When does it run? I've seen some companies do it weekly. How quickly can you recover your data? Are you talking seconds? Are you talking hours? Are you talking days, weeks? What is that answer? And if you're not sure, ask your IT guys. And if you don't have IT guys, well, go get some.
With costs regarding data or backups, you're actually paying for literal physical space on a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah.
That's why it can be so expensive, is you're paying for, somebody has to have a hard drive or a set of hard drive, to make it simple, a hard drive that is plugged in somebody's server room that has your data on it. And somebody has to maintain that as well. If they have, they have equipment that they have to upgrade, they have things they have to do, and then you also have the bandwidth of sending out your data. Do you have enough bandwidth at your office to be able to even do, backups? Is that possible to do? Do you have so much data it won't fit across your pipe? Who knows? Those are the questions that you can bring to us, and we'll be happy to help you resolve them and figure them out as well.
We had a client bring up a concern that we asked them to get a very large removable hard drive for their backup, to backup to, and they were concerned that the cost of their backup was determined by the size of that drive. I politely told them that no, it is the amount of data that they own. But just so that our listeners and viewers are aware, when you have multiple copies of that backup set, say going back a month or more, it takes a great deal of additional storage above and beyond how much is actually on your server. So let's say you have 500 gigabytes of data on your server. That's going to take somewhere around 2 or 3 terabytes of, or 2,000 or 3,000 gigabytes of storage for the backup alone to do that. So it scales quite a bit in the background. And as you continue to stretch it, we had a client that determined that they wanted backups going back for 1 full year, and that the amount of storage required to do that was astronomical, and there was a huge price tag associated with that. One last thing to consider with your backup is, especially when you're dealing with cloud-based, but even when you're dealing with local-based, is to make sure that your data is encrypted. What happens if somebody breaks into your office, or perhaps an employee were to take your backup hard drive or your tape, if you will? I don't really think anybody uses tapes anymore.
If you do, please stop.
If you do, please stop. That's a great way to put it. The tapes are very slow, and their storage is not there.
They have a shelf lifespan as well.
Yeah, there's arguments for them, and that's fine. But what if someone were to take out your backup hard drive and just walk out with it? They would have all of your data. They would have every last bit of your company on that, and that information needs to be encrypted.
What's our encryption standard here, Dan?
Between our two different systems, we use AES 256. I believe it's triple DES encryption.
Basically, somebody could walk away with our entire set of backup hard drives, all of them, and it would take them thousands of years to be able to get the data.
Yeah, and you talk about NSA and decrypting data and all that sort of stuff and how they can break into it and that. What they're referring to is kind of more your bank level encryption. When you're dealing with your bank online, that's 128-bit encryption. We're dealing with 256-bit encryption, and it is magnitudes of power more complicated.
Now that sounds like it's double.
It is not double.
Exponentially greater.
It's exponentially greater, yes. You're talking 2 to the 128th power versus 2 to the 256th power. If you do that math real quick, those numbers are monstrously different in size. And that's the level of encryption that we work with over here. And honestly, any proper backup system would deal with that level of encryption. That's all I've got on backups. Do you have anything else you want to throw in there?
Please make sure you have a backup, no matter what. And it even goes for home users as well. Home users probably have much less data to use to back up, but make sure that you're keeping copies of any important bank statements or any important personal records, those kind of things. I keep a record of like utility bills. I keep them uploaded in the cloud, and it's not really backup. I just use a cloud storage for those things, just in case anything were to happen. I know where those are. I just keep important things. I don't keep all of it there, just a few things. That way, if I ever need them, I know exactly where they are.
I've seen in an emotional plea to make sure that you have a proper backup, I've seen too many tears. I've seen employees of companies in tears because the backup was lost. I've seen residential people, home people in tears because they lost the pictures of their kids and stuff like that. It will happen. It's not an if. It will happen. Make sure your information is backed up. And again, it may not be because of hardware failure. There are plenty of other reasons that your data can be lost that that require you to have a backup.
Like alien X-rays. You never know.
Yeah. All right. I think that's about it for today.
Cool.
This is brought to you by Frontpoint-IT. We are your local IT service provider. We like to bill ourselves as your outsourced IT department. For you guys out there who realize that you're in over your heads with IT, if you're a business owner or an office manager, we are the company that will come and help out with that. We will get to know you. We will get to know your employees, and we will work with them, and we will become a partner and an asset for you. www.frontpoint-it.com.
We do backups.
I'm Dan Stanford.
I'm Jeremy Wright. Thanks for listening, guys.
Have a good day.